I mean, I basically used an entrepreneurial approach to get into Harvard for grad school because I didn't have the grades. If you're not taking risks and trying to do stuff as an entrepreneur, you're not gonna be that guy like right. You said, that's willing to walk through walls. Sometimes it's not, you can't keep score. When you start keeping score, well, I'm gonna do this, I need that. No, just do it because you love it and do a really good job. Think big picture and put in the work.
Now you started XSET. How is that experience for you? Because eGaming is going nuts.
It's so big that gaming touches music, gaming touches fashion, gaming touches traditional sports, it touches art and entertainment. And that's kind of that nexus is where we live.
Hi, and welcome to Common Denominator, a podcast about growth, mindset, and entrepreneurship. I'm Moshe Popack, and today we talk about business and esports with Greg Selkoe. Greg is the founder of the professional esports and entertainment organization, XSET. He previously founded the streetwear e-commerce company, Karmaloop, has a master's degree from Harvard, and has served in the C-suite of numerous other companies as well. Before we start the show, just a quick ask. If you enjoy Common Denominator, we'd be grateful if you'd subscribe on YouTube, Facebook, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It helps promote the show, and it helps us get great guests. Thanks so much, and here's my conversation with Greg. Hi, Greg, and welcome to Common Denominator.
Hey, Moshe, thanks for having me.
Read your Wikipedia. It's funny, it was on there. What was the background for you when you were expelled from school?
Yeah, I kind of wonder why I didn't do my Wikipedia page, so why they put that on there. But I mean, it's part of my story, so I'm totally, in fact, I think, just like you meet a lot of people who are entrepreneurs who think differently, that have issues in school. So, I mean, essentially, I just was, quote unquote, what they called a bad kid, but really I just had severe ADD, and I was daydreaming and drawing and doing other things. I talked a lot in class. I didn't listen to teachers. And, in my grade school, fifth grade, they had enough of me and they kicked me out. It was a private school. So, and then I went to public school. And then my junior year in public school, they basically said like I was getting all D's and I wasn't doing well. And they were basically like, well, you got to do the year over, you got to leave, right? And so my parents actually sent me to a school called Winchendon, which is in Massachusetts. That's sort of a school for kids that are smart but have issues, which I would say was probably a good description of me. And, that year, the guy who was, it was pretty tough school in terms of discipline, had to wear a jacket and tie every day, was small. And then the guy who was like sort of the dorm guy was a former Marine. He had done like 3 tours in Vietnam. He was just like a real badass, but super nice guy. But, really, really straightened me out. In that one year, I realized like, I'm not going to, I'm going down from here if I don't get my shit together.
We have to completely, I think, redesign the whole school system, because that's easy, right? A teacher comes in and it's easy to teach to the kids that are gonna, I have ADD, right? And I'm sitting there running around. But the school systems, I think, have to change to realize, because I think at least 50% of the kids are on the other side. Meaning they're not interested. So the job of the system is to figure out how this person learns, right? Not to just give them random. And it's funny because I see all the kids that were the A students in the class, so they had some job, they lost the job, but then all the kids that couldn't find jobs because we were all kind of expelled from school and different things like that. They're all now, I'll be 44 soon, and they're all like killing it, like building skyscrapers and doing all these crazy things. So it's interesting how it actually, in reality, plays out. That's interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, obviously, I think both of us, part of our issues were that, we might have been smarter than the teachers and the kids in certain areas. I'm not saying academically, but and almost like just had a different way of thinking that they weren't used to and way of learning. And yeah, you're right. Like, I think, there's probably, I'm fortunate because I had, came from a 2-parent home, middle class, parents stuck with me, really tried to figure out what the hell we were going to do to get me to get through school. There's a lot of kids that just don't have that, right? And so we have future entrepreneurs and future people that could contribute a lot of creativity and and value to society that are being failed by the school system. So it's a challenge, like trying to find alternative ways to educate kids who may be very smart but just can't sit still and kind of do the traditional rote memorization, sit in the front. And so, yeah, I mean, it's something that, is interesting to me. I don't have the time to work on it now, but maybe in the future. And a lot of times when I interact with kids, I've done a lot of sort of volunteer work or nonprofit work, or, I'll sometimes go to schools and like sit on panels and stuff. Like I went to the Rainbow Coalition headquarters in Chicago last summer, with a guy named Adrian Colbert, who's an investor and is part of XSET. He's an NFL. He plays for the Bears. He's an NFL player. And we went and spoke to the kids, and these kids were from tougher backgrounds in Chicago, and yeah, there was a lot of them that were. I don't know how they were doing in school. That wasn't really the idea, but there were a lot of them that were clearly super smart. They loved video games because that's what we were talking about, right? And a couple of them they're 14, 15 years old. They had their own little businesses going already. One of them's going to intern for XSET this summer. So, yeah, I think trying to always look out for people who maybe have similar issues to me, or maybe need a little bit of different perspective. And you talk a lot on the show about attitude. I think one of the things that I distinctly remember in my life. So, I barely got into college. Essentially, like the school that I went to, Winchendon, the dean was like best friends with the dean of admissions. I got rejected from everywhere I applied. They somehow got me in, right?
Yeah.
And it was my sophomore year, and I somehow picked up the book How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I read that book, and it was like, I was like, holy shit. I'm having so many problems because I'm swimming upstream and I'm being a dickhead kind of, And so I remember after I read like the first chapter, I went to the cafeteria and I called the woman who behind the counter by her name, and I was friendly, and it just like opened up this whole, and the response was just like night and day of how I get, responses. I always used to be like, what's wrong with these people? Why don't they, but it's really got to come from you, and they feed off of your energy. And that was like a life-changing moment for me.
Yeah. No, I do think though, that experience, because a lot of who we become as adults is from childhood, and that, I guess, adaptability that we have to do, right? So you're suspended, you're being expelled, and you're trying different schools, and you're, I think as an entrepreneur, I don't know if you would agree that I always say that, like, today you have to have so much adaptability. And right, so some people that are just like straight and narrow, but I know in my business, my main business is real estate. I'm constantly every single day problem solving, and shifting and adapting.
Yeah, and you have to be super creative, and you have to have perseverance and ability to. I had a lot of self-esteem issues around that, but I also someplace deep down inside believed in myself as well. I mean, I basically used an entrepreneurial approach to get into Harvard for grad school because I didn't have the grades. I didn't have, my test scores were pretty good. I got to take extra time because of learning disabilities. But, I basically, the schools here in Boston where I live, I got to know the dean of the admissions through networking. And I got to know some important people to the school who I got to know personally, who were willing to write me recommendations. And that's how I got in, right? And so, because, they basically were saying, well, look, he's not traditional, but man, he's showing this like interesting leadership. And it was a struggle. Like they first didn't let me in, believe it or not. And I actually got the guy, Dean McCarthy was his name, to reconsider, and they offered me a seat like a month later after that. And he said it was the first time in his entire career that they ever reversed a rejection for and part of the reason why they reversed it, I was able to network with really important people who just kind of liked my story, were willing to make a phone call to the school. And, I remember I got a call from him. He's like, look, we're reconsidering, but just stop having people call me. He's like, it's good enough. And then, a week later, they called me and they said, look, we're going to offer your spot.
Definitely big accomplishment. But I think that the way I see, when we talk about business success, what actually seems to happen, okay, fine, you're reading articles, you're doing the work, you're going to schools, you're doing all that stuff for the box. But in the end, I think of like, okay, this is the result we got to get to. How are we have to throw out all the ways that other people tried and failed, right? You learn from them, but it always seems like the guys that actually get it done, like in your case, right? That's not typical, right? No one's sitting there making friends with, the dean and getting all these recommendation letters. You're just like, you know what? I'm going to do whatever it takes, right?
Yeah, and I showed him I wanted it in a way that was probably not, even though everyone wants to go to a good school like that. Yeah, I think, whatever it takes. It's that drive that I'm going to figure this out. This is the right place for me. And though you don't know it yet, it's going to be, you're going to let me in, basically.
Yeah, I have a guy sent me unbelievable persistent emails. I don't really have a place for him, but he's like, listen, because everyone just kind of gives up. He's like, listen, I know we haven't spoken in a week, 2 weeks, but I want to be there with you. And in the end, that's the guy. So that's the way it seems to me. Like that's the guy, right, that you'll give a chance. The guy that's going to be there, keep his mouth shut, keep his head down, and do what he says, right? I mean, all the time.
I mean, all the people who have worked very close with me, in some cases I wanted them to work with me. In other cases, they really wanted to work with me. But like there's, I look for persistence, and oftentimes I'll throw obstacles in on purpose to say, hey, well, I want you to do this, and they're like, well, wait a second, this is the weekend. Am I getting paid for this? Like, nope. And the people who are willing to do it because they clearly have a passion for what we're doing and understand, okay, I'm building a company. I got to invest my time, my sweat equity or whatever. Then I'm like, those are the type of people that I want around me ultimately.
I'll tell you, a lot of kids coming out of college ask me, they'll ask me advice. What will be the most efficient way for them to be successful? And maybe 99% of people do not follow the advice. I'll say, listen, go find what you love to do. Find the person in the world. You have no obligations. If you just came into college, go, as long as you don't, obviously student loans, but go and find the person that's doing what you love and hound them and tell them you'll work for them for free for a year. You'll bring them coffee, shine their shoes, do whatever it is. Just be around them and don't open your mouth. Whatever they ask you, fine, you answer, but don't do that. There's been one person that did that. Super successful today. But that's it. That's like the best way to learn. It's your passion. It's what you love to do. And you're around someone that's making a lot of money doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I give the same advice. And, it's interesting to me. And I'm a pretty tolerant guy. So, even if I'm parting ways with someone, I'm not yelling or getting upset or, I guess we've all had our moments. But generally, I'm pretty much like, hey, look, it's not working out or whatever. I'm not, and I'm always trying to be, someone who even would be around to help people in the future. But most of the time, what happens with folks that don't work out in companies that I've been involved in, they're just not willing to do the extra stuff, right? They feel like they're owed something from day one. And you have to build sort of, and I wouldn't expect it, I expect the same from me as I do from anyone else, is that, sometimes it's not, you can't keep score. When you start keeping score, well, I'm going to do this, I need that, no, just do it because you love it and do a really good job. And even if it seems like it's taking longer, you will eventually be recognized for that, and it will pay. And then all of a sudden, maybe you say, I'm behind my peers. I'm still living at home, but I'm working for this guy or girl for free. All of a sudden, 2 years later, you've accelerated, but you're 2 years behind for the first 2 years. So it's really important to think big picture and put in the work.
I know your first huge success, Karmaloop. Tell us about that experience and what that is.
Yeah, and I definitely had some serious failure there too. And I think, I'm happy to talk about that as well. I think it's important for people to hear. My mentor used to say, it's good to learn from your mistakes, but it's better to learn from other people's mistakes. So Karmaloop, it still exists. It's 24 years old, which is crazy because I don't feel that old. I started it even before grad school. I lived with my parents until I was about 28. I took no salary until the company was profitable. And essentially, this was the early 2000s. So e-commerce was a brand new thing. It came from a passion that I liked this kind of streetwear culture, b-boy culture, graffiti art, hip hop, DJ culture, even punk rock, skateboarding, just this sort of subculture kind of clothing and that kind of movement that went with it. And I realized if you didn't live in like New York or LA, even Boston only had one or two shops like this, right? And certainly Ohio, Kansas, there was nothing. But these kids were seeing that, at the time it was MTV, right? So they were seeing these brands and these clothes and this style all the time, but they had no access to it, right? So that was the initial idea. So we essentially set up this e-commerce site. And the other thing that we did really early on that everyone was thinking about when they thought about e-commerce at that time, and it looked like a catalog, but just online, right? Very bland, and we started putting content on the site. We started shooting the clothing on models that looked like the type of people who would wear the clothes, and started building a culture around it. And I mean, I can't tell you how many people were like, what are you doing? This doesn't make sense. You're not gonna, if you put content on an e-commerce site, people are not going to stay. Well, ultimately, fast forward, we became the largest streetwear retailer in the world. At our peak, we were doing 180 million a year at offices in Denmark, New York, LA, Boston was the headquarters. And we basically sort of revolutionized this kind of fashion that's now much more mainstream. Pharrell Williams was creative director for a while. We were the first e-commerce site to ever launch a YouTube channel. We did live stream shopping in 2010 when the only way to live stream the internet was a company called Livestream. That's how early it was, right? So we did a lot of things early. And, ultimately, I'm proud to say we did over $1 billion, over that time. A lot of people made a lot of money. It was a great experience, but, in the end, I also learned some tough lessons. We wound up, after being there for 15 years, my, exit was painful. There was a private equity group that took over. So, but yeah, I mean, the business experience overall is always going to be ups and downs. But it was an amazing I hit a grand slam on my first business. So not always easy to do.
I talk to a lot of people, and they always, I'm part of a business network, and some of my friends are looking towards their exit. But I always see take it maybe 6 months or a year later. So they're usually, like you said, they'll have this private equity, they'll come in, and then they got to work for them for 3 years. And in the end, okay, so they got this check, right? They pay the taxes on that. And in the end, their identity or a lot of what they're doing ends up going that way. And I generally, I'm just generally not a big fan. If you believe in something, you take it all the way. I don't know, from your experience, maybe you talk a little bit more about that. You're saying that, the private equity, I guess maybe they squeezed out different things. I mean, of that.
Yeah,
just lessons to be learned.
It's a long story,
right?
But I think essentially, what you're saying is true, particularly because we were a lifestyle business, right? And I don't, I built this was my baby. I built this from, and when I say I hit a grand slam overnight, it takes 10 years to be an overnight success. I mean, I worked really hard at it, but the business happened. Most businesses fail in the first year. Very few businesses make it past 2 years, right? It gets less and less likely to get to the business is 24 years old. There's very few businesses relative to the and it's not much anymore. It's kind of a shadow of its former self, but it still exists. It still generates revenue. And yeah, the private equity group didn't understand that if you take the culture out of what we're doing and try to just, maximize revenue at the expense of like what the customer experience is like, and and so they just, when I was saying, look, you kind of need me here, right? They didn't really believe it. I think from their perspective as guys who can't start anything, don't do anything other than, move money around and
Sure.
Take companies basically. And I'm not saying there aren't plenty of good private equity guys. These guys were not. And I think for them, it's like, well, they look at the world like cogs, and hey, it's like a coal mine. We'll just clear this guy out and tomorrow we'll turn it on and the coal will start coming out of the mine. Like, that's not how it works in a lifestyle business. You need to keep the culture alive, just the same way they brought Steve Jobs back to Apple. There's a million examples of sort of corporate types, financial types saying, what does this guy really even do? He's kind of like, all over the place. He doesn't, I'm not saying this is hypothetical because it's not exactly, I don't think what they said. I don't know what they said, but, he doesn't really read the numbers. He doesn't understand this. He doesn't realize like we can do the same thing for a third of the price and we're going to take some money out of the company now. And, and the bottom line is that I would love to see a statistic, but many, many, many times, like, I got to think 9 out of 10 times these private equity deals, the company eventually goes, gets wrecked. And I guess they make so much money off that one deal, they don't care about the other 9 that they destroy. But I mean, companies like ours, we put our blood, sweat, and tears into this company. And that matters. It's reflected in everything that's done in the company. If you take that away, it's, it doesn't work. And I think, I've learned that lesson now. I think nothing wrong with selling your company to private equity, but you should get a check and expect that, if it works out, great, but you should be happy with the result when the private equity guys came in. That wasn't the case for me. I fortunately had a very big exit earlier on where I sold a portion of the company to a venture group that was actually really great and were super supportive. But, I think the other thing is you really got to know the individuals you're dealing with. I didn't know the people well. And as I got to know them, I realized that, I'd gotten in bed with the wrong folks.
Yeah, I saw from Mark Andreessen, he said 4,000 potential companies to be funded, 200 get funded.
Yeah.
15 of those 4,000 original, and they get funded by the top VC firms. Only 15 end up being, let's just call it $100 million plus revenue. So and that funds everything. So you might be on the other side of the bell curve. Your company is just, like you're saying, moving around money. I know many people that act all sophisticated, and they have access to the money. They're moving around money, just trying to get the fees. And I just say to people listening, you got to be careful with that because you're just going to see your companies gutted. But I know also, so after that point, which is where you ended up going to, I guess you were president of FaZe Clan. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so there was another company in between. So, you talk about, it's funny, you mentioned Mark Andreessen. It was actually Ben Horowitz was kind of how I got back on my feet, who's his partner.
Sure.
So essentially, like, I was pretty depressed after, this. I was offered a chance to stay at a very, what I thought, meager salary and, was basically sidelined. And I just said, I can't do it. I didn't take the job. I left the company. And so, I'm like, what am I going to do next? And I was thinking like, okay, I'll take a little time off, but I really needed, I got a big financial hit. I can go into that because I had signed some stuff personally, which I had to wind up paying off. It was millions of dollars. I did it. I didn't want to declare bankruptcy or anything. I had the money, but it was a lot of money. It changed my lifestyle for a little bit there. And I was definitely teetering on the edge a couple times. But, I finally But so I went out to so I got an invitation from I have a friend named Divine who's friendly with Ben Horowitz. I got an invitation to one of his barbecues, and I don't know if you're familiar, but like he has barbecues with like Nas and Jay-Z and all these. And I was like, I'm not going. I'm not going. My wife's like, you probably be good. Like, go. She probably wanted me to because I was moping around the house.
Yeah.
So just go out and it'll be good for you. You got to go back out there and, um, you know, and I was getting beat up in the Boston press a lot for having a company that was doing 180 million and then have it, go through a restructuring. I mean, even the year we did restructuring was still 100 million revenue company. It was profitable. It didn't have to do that, but it's a long story. But, I think Boston, they have a different sort of culture around entrepreneurship here. That's, when you kind of make mistakes, it feels different than Silicon Valley where they're taking big swings all the time. And that's just part of the game. So I was pretty depressed. I got out to Ben Horowitz's barbecue. And when I came in, there were so many people like, yo, you went big, man. I used to buy this from everyone had a story about my company, Karmaloop. Everyone had seen what happened, was like, that's amazing, man. You fucking like, look at all you've done. Like, not like, oh shit, you just like are unceremoniously, resigned from the company, and this private equity group took it, and they did a chapter restructuring. None of that. It was like all positive stuff about being an entrepreneur. So obviously that really felt great, right? They had just a different viewpoint than certainly the press that I've been talking to. So long story short, I met a guy named Paul Judge, who's an amazing entrepreneur. Paul Q. Judge. He did Greenwood Bank with Killer Mike. He owns the is it A3C or whatever it's called, the big Atlanta event down there. He's one of the owners there. He's just done a lot of amazing stuff, and Andreessen's funded a lot of his, A16Z. So I basically ran into him. We started talking, and he's like, "Hey, let's start a company. I'll fund you." Like, and he's like, I'm like, "Look, dude, I can't work for free like I've done at other companies because I'm like really hurting." He's like, "How much you need to make?" He was pretty hefty. He's like, "Good, you're hired." We started the company a week after that. I mean, he saved my fucking life from one entrepreneur to the other. So then wound up through that going to Y Combinator out in Silicon Valley, which is, I lived out in Silicon Valley. We did that company, Paul and I together, but he was doing a couple other ones. So it was really my thing. And then another guy came in that was a partner for a while. But then after that, I started another company and I moved to West Hollywood. And that's how I kind of got to FaZe Clan. But I'll take a break there just because I need a breath. But, essentially it was an amazing cultural experience for me to be in this culture of entrepreneurs where there were all these people who still believed in me, and someone who was willing to take a big bet on me that was, frankly, really saved me from a downward spiral.
I think that's what Ben probably saw in you. He probably saw that you're going to do whatever it takes to make it happen. You just have that naturally in your DNA. I see it. I mean, I'm talking to you and I see that that's just how you're built, right? And in the end, fine, circumstances, but real people don't care about that. I remember sitting with a bank and a fellow that I know, he did very well, development, big buildings, and he went through bankruptcy, and I heard that this bank funded this guy to the tune of like over $100 million. And I asked him, I said, why? I said, what's that about? He's like, that because he went through what he went through, because he experienced it firsthand. Because no single entrepreneur that's made it, that's really, really made it, they haven't gone through real stuff. And so you have to. So it's just the place where you're at. And he saw that, and he's like, you know what? Let's do it. I've done that. I've seen that. That's real. That's life. So
yeah. No, I mean, I think it's 100% true. You want to bet on someone like me because I know all the mistakes and I want to avoid those. Doesn't mean I won't have failure again or anything in my life, but I came out the other side of that much wiser. Yeah. And I think, it was interesting because there's a company called The Network, which is pretty big. And my good friend, Aaron Levant, is the CEO. And I was actually, I had started another company. I was out in LA, and like I got a call from Jimmy Iovine's people to come in and interview for this job because this guy Aaron had suggested it for the CEO role that he eventually took. So during the interview, I was like, "You got the wrong guy. You need to hire the guy who recommended me." And that's eventually what they did. But when I was talking to Jimmy Iovine, I told him about the private equity because they were asking me about. It was an hour and a half discussion in his office with Paul Wachter, who's the head of Main Street Advisors, and Jimmy Iovine. And when I told the private equity, she says, "Oh, every good entrepreneur has one of those. The private equity monsters got you," or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that if you're not taking risks and trying to do stuff as an entrepreneur, you're not gonna be that guy like
Right.
you said that's willing to walk through walls. Sometimes the wall falls on your head, but you're gonna dig out.
Right. Either you're gonna do it because no one's gonna do it. Either you're gonna do it or you're not. But tell me about now you start XSET. How is that experience for you? Because I see eGaming is going nuts, and I think it has trajectory, like multiple times revenue possibilities worldwide.
I mean, there's 3 billion people that game worldwide, and they're all different backgrounds, all over the world. We're getting more digital, so it's not something that is a blip. Games are just getting more sophisticated. There's immersion. There's obviously Apple Glass. There's AR. There's tons of stuff happening. So it's only going to be a bigger a bigger part of people's lives. So I obviously I'm in the industry, so of course I agree with you that there's a huge upside and future ahead. And the sort of the way I'll touch on FaZe Clan briefly, and then we should talk about XSET or whatever you want to talk about. You're the host, so after the Y Combinator thing, I moved out to LA, started a business. There was a sort of narrative e-commerce, which were telling stories around clothing, using celebrities. Met the guys from FaZe Clan. It's a long story, but essentially they were in financial trouble at that time. Like, it looked like they were, and I really liked the guys. And I also had just come, it was like a personal passion. I had just gone through something. I'm like, I want to get in here and help these guys. And I also saw, huge upside in gaming, right? It's only gotten much bigger since then. So I basically went in, I merged my company. I helped them raise a lot of capital. I wound up, being the co-head of the business. So it was president and CEO, but on paper, we were co-equals for about, 2.5 years. And then, during COVID, I came back to Boston, and I wound up starting XSET because even though I really enjoyed FaZe Clan and I was able to learn a ton about the gaming culture, which was sort of my transition from fashion to gaming, and I brought a lot of that stuff into gaming. It was the first thing that wasn't my brand, right? I was working for someone else's brand. And there were certain ideas and things I had that I just didn't have the leeway or the ability to kind of execute on. Even if I was the boss, there was 4 founders and a CEO. They were also bosses. So it was very, very challenging in that regard. And so I exited. I had a great financial exit. The company wound up having some real financial challenges about 3 years after I left. Fortunately, I got out completely, learned my lesson, which is, when I kind of went and I said, look, I want to go. I said, and the guy who was the CEO was happy because he's like, look, I'm going to be the CEO now. I'm going to have all the power. And that was very important to him. But I said, you guys got to, if I'm going to leave and we're going to leave friends, you got to buy all my equity. They're like, you don't want to leave some in? I'm like, nope, I want it all. I was also starting a competitor. So, but yeah, so I left, started XSET, and we have a sort of a different approach to gaming, which I'm happy to tell you more about. But as you pointed out, it's so big that gaming touches music, gaming touches fashion, gaming touches traditional sports, it touches art and entertainment, and that's kind of that nexus is where we live.
Yeah, and I see it. If you're talking about like you said, 3 billion people. I think it's the tip of the iceberg of functionality of how we are as humans. It's going to completely overlap that. But I want to ask you, going through all these experiences and looking back now, what is something that you're deeply grateful for?
My wife,
Hmm.
because, when I was going through the sort of the financial hardship, I was thinking about declaring personal bankruptcy. I didn't wind up doing it. I dug myself out and I paid off millions of dollars of loans that, I foolishly, signed for, that as soon as I was out of Karmaloop, I owed them, which I didn't realize. So, and I remember going in to see the bankruptcy attorney when I was kind of having a consultation. He's like, well, they're about to find out if your wife really loves you, because about 50% of the time when I have these entrepreneurs come in here who were wealthy and then lost it all, the wife also goes, that, and I was like stunned, and I was like, no, there's no chance that's happening. I had no doubt, obviously, but a lot of folks have relationships where the man or the woman who's on the other side is just not built for being an entrepreneur's spouse. And I don't necessarily blame them. I wouldn't really even blame her. It was a challenging time, but she stuck with me 100%. We had to sell art, we had to sell a bunch of stuff. Never once said, hey, I'm upset about this, you're going to get back on your feet. And she was my biggest supporter. And so I think that to me was like, I couldn't do all the things I'm doing without my wife and without a couple other good people that have been around me, but primarily my wife. And now I have kids, obviously. They know what I do, they like it. Obviously it's gaming, and everyone sort of understands, hey, dad's an entrepreneur, he's going to have a call when we're at he's going to have to do 2 Zoom calls when we're at Universal Studios on a bench, right? And they're okay with it.
Relate to that. Yeah, but it's great. Between your wife and Horowitz, I mean, that's 2 places that could have gone sliding doors either way. And so congratulations for that. I mean,
yeah. I mean, the Horowitz thing really was, while he had hosted the barbecue, which was great, and it was Paul Judge who was the guy who stepped up and and funded the business. So he's been funded by Horowitz a lot, but it was Paul Judge, and I'm forever grateful to him.
Yeah. And what's something about you that people don't know?
I love architecture.
That's a math. So you're more. My son's also. My oldest also loves the architecture as well. He's more logical and math. That's his.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times if I have free time, I'll read, books or the type of coffee table books. A lot of it's on buildings. So when I went to Harvard, I went to the Kennedy School, which is a school for leadership, basically is what they, and public policy. And then I also got in. The reason it was so hard to get into this thing on top of it was I was admitted to both Kennedy School. It was a joint degree, so you get admitted to the degree. Graduate school design. So I did 1 year at graduate school design. I didn't wind up getting that part of the degree, but I got to be around, where they have all the architectural models, and they have a studio thing where you had to do, and to me, like I'm a frustrated person, non-architect who loves architecture. I think in some ways it's probably better that I'm not an architect, because it's a different perspective when you don't have to do it every day. It's to me, it's very interesting, but it's not necessarily where I would want to be spending all my time. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, and I'm sure this is true with you as well. I mean, a lot of times people know you as an entrepreneur, they only know kind of one side of your interests.
Sure.
And yeah, there's a number of things that, like, I don't think a lot of people would be kind of surprised. Like, I read a lot of historical stuff, and I'm in the gaming industry, super, digital and future looking. But, there's certain things that I enjoy that I think ultimately do inform like what I do, even in gaming, right? And leadership and in business. You can learn a ton from people like Churchill or Ulysses S. Grant, and about perseverance and believing yourself when no one else believes in you.
And what would you say is the future now? Looking at XSET, what's the future for the company, kind of high level?
Yeah, so I mean, we're in our 4th year. We'll be 5 years old in July, which is crazy because it seems like I started yesterday. The company is really becoming a media company, and always the first thing I ever wrote about XSET was we're a lifestyle brand and a media company. The first sort of 3.5 to 4 years, really, because we're halfway through the fourth year, more than halfway. We really were a lifestyle brand, and I'll give you the distinction, because a lifestyle brand meant like we were around the gaming culture, right? We did activations and events. We did stuff with the gaming related events with the Red Sox and the NFL, and we made merchandise, and we did different things that were, of the culture that gave this brand credibility in the gaming space. I mean, we're one of the most well-known, gaming brands in North America. I'm surprised when I meet our target market and they don't know who we are, which happens, but less and less. But really what we want to do ultimately, now that we have this brand, this umbrella, is make content. And when I mean make content, I don't know if your kids watch streamers or Mr. Beast, sure, or YouTube related stuff. We want to be a content studio and create content using our gamers, that kind of tells the gaming story and then connects it to all these other things, right? We have a cooking show we're developing with a guy. The only thing that's gaming about it is he got famous from gaming, but he's doing a cooking show because it's also a passion, right? So I think ultimately what the future for XSET is going to be a lot more media focused. And it's already developing that way. We just launched a brand new website, which, before our site was all commerce, now has a huge media component as well. So, our kind of motto for this year is content, content, content.
Well, I want to say thank you, Greg. This has been really eye-opening and great to hear. I love where you are right now, and want to wish you great success.
This was fun. This was really fun, and I appreciate you having me on. And it's always good to talk to a fellow entrepreneur, because very few people understand as great as it is and all the upside, what you really have to go through, and the sort of the close calls you go through, and all the stuff that you have to muster to get to where you're going. So I think what you're doing is a super valuable service to folks, and
appreciate it.
People need to go into it with their eyes open.
Yeah, I think it's the way I sum it up: entrepreneurship, hard, win, hard, win. That's it. So just get used to that. But how can people learn more about XSET and follow you on social?
Yeah, so first follow XSET, it's super easy. All our handles are at XSET. All my handles on Twitter and IG are at SELKOE. So at Selkoe, my last name. And, look, if folks want to email me, they can email me at gregs@XSET. I get back to everyone. I love talking to young folks who are trying to I sound like an old man. I never thought I'd talk.
We're probably around the same age, so there you go. Yeah.
But I love talking to young entrepreneurs, and I always try to get back to people. Doesn't mean I can do it always right away, but I try to never. If I've ever left you hanging, it wasn't intentional. I just didn't see because But it's definitely something that worked for both of us, right? We'll get talking to folks in their industry, and reach out to me, and I'll talk to you.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. Really, it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Greg. Next week, in honor of the 4th of July, we're re-airing one of our favorite episodes with Noah Galloway. Noah is a former United States Army soldier, a motivational speaker, and an extreme sports enthusiast. He was injured during the Iraq War, losing his left arm above the elbow and left leg above the knee. But that hasn't stopped him or even slowed him down. He was a contestant on Dancing with the Stars, graced the cover of Men's Health, and continued to inspire thousands of people around the world. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, we'd be grateful for a like, share, and subscribe. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, feel free to leave a rating and review. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you again soon.